The, okay, thank you. Though our need to connect is innate, many of us frequently feel alone. Loneliness is a state of distress or discomfort that results when one perceives a gap between one's desires for social connection and intimacy and actual experiences of it. Even some people who are surrounded by others throughout the day, and we all know this, are in a long-lasting marriage, which I just mentioned, still experience a deep and pervasive loneliness. Research suggests that loneliness poses serious threats to well-being as well as long-term physical health. Emotional loneliness is a subjective feeling of a lack of a close, meaningful relationship or emotional support. The thing that's important about loneliness, I think a lot of people automatically, everything gets connected with people who are aging now, as though they're the only ones that feel lonely. But that unfortunately is not the case. It's pervasive throughout our lifetime. In different stages, it has different impacts, but it affects us all. And what we're going to be talking about today is loneliness and what it does to you and how it can impact you. And what we have here are three panelists and fellow colleagues and friends who are going to talk about different ages and stages, but not necessarily ages, more the stages of loneliness, of growing up and what you experience. Because every developmental age has its own threats and demands. The first panelist that we're going to hear from, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of the structure of the session. There are three panelists. They're going to talk about 10 minutes each. And I'd ask you to wait. I'd like to be able to have questions in between each panelist, but we only have very limited time. So I want you to be able to hear everybody and then ask questions. So if you have something that's burning in you and you want to say it, write it down somewhere so you don't forget, because I might do that.
And I'll be watching for questions remotely.
Yeah, Carol's going to be watching and helping me with that. Okay. Susan Gibeson is a native Washingtonian, which is a real rare breed, I think. She earned her BA in education at Mount Vernon's Women's College and George Washington University, and her master's in marriage and family therapy from Pacific Oaks College in Pasadena, California. So she's gone from one coast to the other. She has worked in education for over 40 years as a preschool teacher, owner-director, a counselor at Head Start, and a director of counseling at a private school in Potomac, serving children of preschool age through 8th grade. She is committed to developing the whole child to achieve their social, emotional, and academic potential by creating an environment of empathy, compassion, and trust, something we all would love to live in. She believes that children need a safe place where their feelings are validated and heard. And I think that's true for children and everybody else in the world. She has seen firsthand how loneliness can deeply affect children of all ages and is pleased to join our panel this morning to discuss this important topic. Susan?
Thank you. Thank you, Venus. Thank you everyone for being here, for Carol and the committee. I'm so honored to be talking about such an important topic that I've seen over the years. So I thought maybe I'd talk a little bit, I'm gonna put my glasses on different signs of loneliness in children. Oftentimes we see our children being withdrawn from their activities, not willing to participate. And we see a lot of mood changes and sleeping disruptions and really difficulty in schoolwork. As our teenagers, we see more substance abuse and too much screen time. This has become quite an issue that we're all aware of. Loneliness isn't a phase. It affects mental health, our self-esteem, and overall development. Why are children lonely? That seems to be the conversation. What's going on right now? There's a lot of shifts right now with social and family dynamics. There's social pressures and peer relationships that have changed. The impact of technology has risen, and children seem to be talking through screens and not to one another. I've seen quite a bit of that recently, even, well, there was some of that before COVID, but now even more. Of course, there's divorce, there's loss of a grandparent, loss of a family member, or even a pet. And also, a new school. That transition is so incredibly difficult for children. So technology connects us, but it also really isolates us. And I could have a whole conversation about technology, but right now we're going to kind of tighten up a bit. Also, I started to see in middle schoolers the pressure to fit in and the fear of the rejection that leads to avoidance of social situations. How do we help as adults? What can we do? One of the things is open communications. I always say creating a really safe, non-judgmental space really helps our kids. And I always have said to parents, use the car. Get in the car and say, look, we're just going to run up to Giant. Households are so busy right now. Just having that one-on-one with kids is so important. You might have a little one in the back seat, even in a car seat, but you can have a great conversation. And with a teenager, you're sitting side by side. You're not, doing a direct. So that I always use the car as a great place. Also model your connections, your own social healthy relationships, and encourage extracurricular activities. One of the things that I've also said, especially with teenagers, is sometimes their friends confide in them about feeling lonely or not feeling good right now in their life or a situation that's happening at home. Ask that teenager to name out loud 3 adults that they trust, and adults, maybe not an older sibling, well, maybe somebody over 18, but that they can go to. If they say it out loud, then when they meet that adult, they will immediately think of that adult. Because oftentimes friends come and it gets complicated. They want to keep that confidentiality as a friend, but I think that's a really important note. Help your children. I know this sounds kind of like, oh, of course, but help your children explore clubs. Not everybody is good at sports. So look at the chess club, performing arts. There's lots of activities that children can get involved with that are just not the sports. They can take a cooking class. I've seen a lot of kids that really didn't like soccer. They didn't want to go to basketball. So we found performing arts, and they really found a group to be part of. That group environment helps them quite a bit. One of the things that I have found is teaching empathy, encouraging them to reach out to others who might also feel lonely. And when I was working in the schools, it was really terrific that I could get, a buddy. And the teachers are very good at finding that other little one that wants to be a helper. That helped quite a bit. I've also put parents together so that the kids could do outside activities like ice skating or even just hanging out at home. So that's really important. There's some great kids books out there that you can find. Limit the screen time again, balance that technology, my goodness, that outdoor play, family activities, and reading together. I know one family did every Friday night was pizza night and invited other families and friends to come. And then finally, seek professional help. Don't let this go too long. Pediatrician is amazing to be able to, they know the family, they know the child's physical history, but that would be number one. Your school counselor is an incredible resource, and even just as a teacher. And some parents are a little nervous to go or anxious about going to talk to them, but they really do some great work in the everyday school. And then in conclusion, loneliness is so real and its impact is so deep with these children. Parents and grandparents play such a vital role in recognizing these signs, supporting your children and building meaningful connections. And as I conclude right now, your proactive approach can help them develop such a sense of belonging that lasts into adulthood. Hope that helped.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm sure there are a lot of things that you said that have touched people, both here and at home who are listening, and so important. Thank you. So remember, if you have a question to Susan, write it down. Okay, so our next speaker is Rob Bamberger. After a long career in public policy at the Library of Congress, Rob returned to school to earn a Master's of Social Work in 2012. He is interested in aging and elder care and facilitates caregiving support groups at the Iona Senior Services in DC. He is co-chair of the Center for the Study of Aging and Clinical Applications with the new Washington School of Psychiatry. If his name seems vaguely familiar, it may be because you have heard his live Saturday evening program on WAMU-FM, Hot Jazz Saturday Night. He said he would only get up this early on a Sunday morning for Presbyterians.
Thank you, Venus. It's also a great pleasure to be with you and to have been included on this. We've just heard Susan's remarks about loneliness and its manifestation in children, and indeed, we're all three of us talking about different groups of people for whom this is a construct. And as Venus noted, I have been facilitating support groups, one for adult children, caregivers who either supervise care from afar or possibly under the same roof, and another group for spouse and partners in caregiving. And I want to talk about the isolation and loneliness of the caregiver as well as the one who is receiving care. It's often observed that in our lifetimes, there is some likelihood that we'll be called upon to dispense care and very possibly to receive it. And I must say that, doing some work in this area, it is partly in the hopes that I'll be smart enough to make the right choices before I need to make them.
Yes.
Because it's so important to make them when you can be a full participant in the process. So I just want to identify just a few of the facets of loneliness and isolation of the caregiving experience. And one for the caregiver is a loss of contact with friends. To begin with, you are likely to be less available socially. Caregiver is sort of a 24/7 function. And it's tough to know how much tolerance friends have to hear about the content of caregiving. At what point are their eyes glazing over, either literally or figuratively? And friends don't know what to ask, and how could they? Because if you haven't assumed this role, then it is very, very hard to understand the fabric of it. And what often happens is that the friend will ask how the parent or spouse partner is, but not ask how the caregiver themselves happen to be doing. That seems to be a very difficult question to ask. Additionally, one thing that I've heard so many times in these groups is that, hey, we all make plans, we all carry certain fantasies or images of what life in retirement with our spouse will be like. And good heavens, just in my wife's extended family, a wonderful couple down in Georgia in their 50s. Their 3 kids are just about through with higher education, and Jeff has been diagnosed with ALS. And I just, knowing Jeff and Michelle as I do, I'm thinking about kinds of things that I know they wanted to do, and this whole fabric of their lives is going to be changing. And people who are in these groups are often expressing a certain resentment and jealousy and envy. And you don't exactly want your friend who's just been on a safari to come over and show you all their latest slides from this most recent adventure. And, there are those darker feelings people have. Even just this week in a therapy group I co-lead, where someone's husband has been ill for quite some time. She said, I really want this to be over. And in these groups, people can say things that might not play so well on the outside. But the great virtue of groups and support groups, the modality of group, is that people get one another. And there's certain things that you don't have to explain about yourself, because there is some common grounding. And we were chatting just before, and I said that one thing I've learned is it is so important for caregivers to speak their truth, because it's what will keep
Mhm.
keep your head and your psyche above water, because you can only administer good care if you also administer good self-care to oneself. And I'll just make one, I mean, we could go on and on about this, just make one last comment about the caregiving piece of it. And that is also seeing caregivers who won't feel that they can take a respite, not even to go out of town for the weekend, because they're so fearful that the quality of care that will be administered possibly by a sibling. And oh, the sibling stories I've heard, you know, all of the family dynamics, you know, it erupts when caregiving is and elder care are on the scene. But they'll be very concerned the quality of care won't be adequate, but 98% of the time, it's good enough. No harm is done. And people have to feel they can take a few days away from that 24/7. So there's much to that, which we can pursue, but I wanted to devote the other half of my remarks to some concerns that I've been having. And something that I know Venus wanted me to check out, and indeed she's quite right. Caregiving has been associated with increased mortality. Not necessarily, but if the intensity of the caregiving experience is high, the stress and all of the other requisite things that go along with it can have a bearing on longevity. And planning for that possibility that the caregiver should pass on for the person receiving care is another stress in and of itself. I have felt in the current climate a great deal of concern about the vulnerability of seniors and aging. The prospect that our growing aging population, even ourselves here, are going to be vulnerable in the prevailing climate to greater isolation and disconnect and marginalization. One doesn't want to drag the current political environment into anything, but it is a reality. And one of the things that I was preparing myself for, no matter what the outcome of the election, was that there would be a fresh assault on truth, as if we haven't already had enough of an assault on truth. And the problem, one of the problems there, is that when there is a dedicated and widespread assault on truth, the moment comes when doubt becomes like a storm surge that begins to disintegrate the beachhead, the healthy sand, the healthy beach. Doubt begins to penetrate everything. You begin to question and doubt things that are representations of reality, but you doubt, loss of faith. Many people were driven inside by the pandemic and still haven't come out. And when I think about the attack on reality and what constitutes it, and I think of older people who feel more vulnerable, more at risk, and are likelier to withdraw, I think it's going to be necessary for us to be very conscious of greater withdrawal among the elderly who won't know what to trust and how much importance there will be in seeing that we maintain contact and touch with them. Susan alluded to technology, and I think artificial intelligence, while it's not inherently designed to attack truth, threatens it in ways because it threatens innocent truths. As my wife observed, you can't trust pictures, you can't trust videos. And not all of these misrepresentations are rooted in politics. They can be about anything that isn't really significant. I'm going to give a real fast example. I have a friend in my realm who managed to pull Ray Eberle's vocal out of a Glenn Miller record and drop in Buddy Clark who was a superior vocalist. And I'm waiting for the day when someone says, I'd love to hear that Glenn Miller record with Buddy Clark. And I'll say, Buddy Clark never recorded with Glenn Miller. Well, I've heard the record. Look, I can show you the discographies. Buddy Clark never recorded with Glenn. Well, your discography is wrong. No, it's not proven. It's like we'll be thrown into the schoolyard on all sorts of things. And I worry about this. I'll close by saying that hearing about the reopening of Notre Dame, the organ being heard for the first time yesterday, made me think of Charles Lawton as Quasimodo. Well, of course, it was Lon Chaney first in the silent era, but that line from the novel at the end of the 1939 movie, when Quasimodo turns to one of his gargoyles and says, "Why was I not made of stone like thee?" It's so important that we continue to regard the elderly and seniors as sentient people. Some of us have the executive authority and functionality to protect ourselves from being marginalized, kicked to the side of the road, but there are others who will need our advocacy and need to feel our reach. We've all seen people who have been debilitated by illness and disability, but my posture about it is that the greatness still lies within the people you meet in this town who are doing seemingly innocent things in retirement. You discovered they were policymakers, they were in international trade.
Yeah.
They were diplomats. It's just unbelievable,
It's true.
the greatness that lies in the elder population. And I just feel that even when we're in the presence of people who seem to be a shell of who they were, the greatness still lies somewhere within. And it's beholden upon us that we don't lose touch with it or them.
Thank you. Sorry, I got so absorbed. Almost lost my job here. Okay, Michael Gibson received his BA with special distinction in history in 1972 from the University of Oklahoma, where he was selected Phi Beta Kappa, and received his JD there in 1975. He then left the state for stints in private law practice and federal government until he was appointed in 2008 to his current position as an administrative judge with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The author of 2 World War II novels, The Broom Cornfield and Leaving Pontotoc County, and he can correct me on that if I didn't say it right. Michael is working on his 3rd novel that is set in the immediate post-war period. Michael is a member of the Adult Education Committee at Bradley Hills, and I have my pleasure of getting to know Michael now.
Thank you, Venus. Thank you, Susan and Rob. I tell you, it's very humbling to be on a panel with these. These are really the pros from Dover. I hope y'all realize that. I'm just sort of a no account rambling man. I just showed up here, but I'm reminded what I'm going to talk to you about made me think of Will Rogers, who was also from Oklahoma. And he said that all I know is just what I read in the papers, and that's an alibi for my ignorance. So take whatever I say with that context. I'm going to talk about basically 4 topics. First, the U-shaped curve. Secondly, new research into loneliness. Third, elderly men. And 4th, resources to address loneliness. In terms of a U-shaped curve, you've heard Rob and Susan talk about this, but there is a great deal of loneliness that is experienced by young adults and by the elderly. And in between, on the bottom of that U-shaped curve of our lives, people in their 30s to 50s tend not to be as lonely. And the reason for that is that they've got stable and satisfying networks with their children, their spouse, their coworkers. But about 50, loneliness begins to creep into our lives again because our kids go off to college and our parents die. And that loneliness can snowball when we leave the workforce. We lose our coworkers who were part of our connections. We lose our paycheck, and even if we planned well for it, we're still going to have diminished financial resources. Our health tends to fail, as does that of our spouse, if we're lucky enough to have one. And our kids, though we want to stay involved in their lives, they've got their own lives, and you're thinking to yourself, I don't really want to be a burden on my kids, so I'm not going to interject myself too much into their lives. But there's a lot of new research that's come out. The Surgeon General in 2023 issued a public health threat that loneliness poses as big a risk as obesity or smoking. There have been breakthroughs in brain imaging showing that prolonged social isolation activates the same areas of the brain as does hunger and thirst and sleep. As we'll talk about a little later, I think it's consistent with our notion as Presbyterians that God designed us to live in community with each other. And we avoid that in our peril. There have been blood tests done of lonely patients, and those blood tests suggest that loneliness floods our body with stress hormones that produced chronic low-level inflammation throughout our body. Loneliness is associated with a 50% increase in developing dementia. And for heart disease and stroke, an increase of 30% is often associated with loneliness. So with that sort of preface, I want to talk a little bit about elderly men. Susan's talked about young adults, and Rob's talked about how the best laid plans don't always pan out for both caregivers and those who are cared for. But elderly men pose a sort of unusual case. We're poorly equipped for growing old. We may plan financially well for our retirement, but we don't plan psychologically well. The typical baby boomer male derived a great deal of his or her identity from their career. But when those work connections are gone, men in particular have few close friendships to fill the gap. Women are much better at having to, developed close friendships in their lives that men just don't do. When you ladle on top of that health issues, it can become overwhelming. Men have a tendency to ruminate and to get into their own heads with worries and fears that leaves them feeling lonely and isolated. I can give you all a personal anecdote. My wife has said to me that she is sure because I can't handle being alone at all, she is sure that if she were to predecease me, that I would bring a date to her funeral. So, anyway, there's a marked increase in suicide among older men as well. If you look, the statistics per 100,000 people, Women over 65 have a 6% suicide rate. Men have a 30% suicide rate. And it becomes worse as men grow older. It starts out about, it's about 55% for men, whereas women are the lowest of any age group when you get over 85. So there are resources available. We can talk about this in our question and answer if we have time, but I just want to tell you there's 5 things that experts suggest. The first is that you do a relationship audit. It's good to have, 3 to 6 close relationships. Join a community group. Cut back on social media. Don't sit around waiting for someone to contact you, but instead take the initiative yourself, and never confuse loneliness with the positive part, which can be solitude. Bradley Hills has resources available. We have a great grief support workshop that has been held in November. This very week, we're having 2 Blue Christmas services on Wednesday, December 11, one at 1 o'clock and one at 7:30. We also have a visiting team, and we have deacons who are always anxious to visit you. So with that, I'm going to shut up and turn it back to Venus.
Right, and I have the pleasure of opening it up to you all in terms of your questions, comments, thoughts. I'm sure it's been very insightful, what has been said, and profound, and I appreciate very much everyone's contribution. So I will turn it open to you all. Yes.
Just this morning in the Washington Post, I started reading an article about generative AI, like chat friends, imaginary friends, essentially. And that's a whole new ball game of dealing with loneliness, and perhaps not in a good way. As I was reading, I was like, yeah, if these imaginary friends are that good, it's like, does anyone have a friend who has never done anything that annoyed you? I mean, but the generative AI might never. So, but that seems like it's a whole new ball game, and I was wondering if any of you had given any thought to that issue.
Well, I think, what you're describing again captures the sort of double edge to this. I mean, I think Venus, you said, alluded earlier, no, I thought it was you, Susan. Oh, the Venus was
Well,
certainly
we're
capable of making the
fused.
illusion. Yeah, the fact that, in a way, while technology theoretically brings us closer together, it seemed to actually, we've never been more further apart. And it's the same thing with what you're describing. On the one hand, it could be just simply recreational. But on the other hand, if it becomes an obsessional choice, then it has a dark side. So, it's like the Doublemint twins. Yes, it's a breath, yes. There is a dark side to it. It is how we manage it.
I agree. And I think also with our children, we're really being conscious of what they're watching and who they're interacting with is so important. And back to that AI too. When we're talking about teenagers, particularly with the AI, parents stay on top of that.
Yeah, I also think that, you just need to read a couple of Kurt Vonnegut novels. The impact of technology on wanting to have no conflicts at all.
Are you suggesting that our kids need to watch what we are seeing on social media?
Maybe not, maybe not.
Yes, Steve?
Several of us are involved in a support group for some dear friends. The family of a husband, wife, and their daughter. And loneliness is a significant issue for each of the members of that family. The daughter lives far away. She lost her husband a couple of years ago. Husband is a very dominating type of person. He's in assisted living. Wife is still in the family residence, but not capable of doing that, and wants to assert her independence more than she should, like driving a car that hasn't been registered since about 2020. The requests from them to this support group are becoming more and more demanding, and are looking to us more and more like we are becoming facilitators of bad behavior and helping them avoid make decisions. We're on the verge of just shutting the group down to force them to make the decisions they need to. Is that the right thing to do?
It's a hard question.
Well, my suggestion would be to encourage them to seek a care manager.
Try
to-
that,
Hmm?
try that, they resisted.
Because, care managers usually come in, they make an assessment, and hearing from an outsider that they may have crossed that very thin line where safety and security is at risk.
Well, that line's in a rearview mirror.
Yeah, I believe you. I believe you, because that's usually the way it happens, is that when you know you're in trouble, you've been in trouble for some time already.
Mhm.
So I would probably, even if they won't look into that. And I know Iona Senior Services, you probably could just call their general line and get some information about care managers that may be the group, or the SPARE itself explores that a little bit. Care managers are sometimes mediators in making people understand that there does come a point. There was a woman in one of the groups that I've been dealing with whose husband fell in the bathroom in the middle of the night and was lying there because he figured at some point he would be able to get up. And his wife has explained to him how terrible position it puts her in. And he says he understands it, but he was not willing to modify his behavior. And we suggested that she needed to sort of say to him, "You're getting it isn't enough. Because if I cannot assure your safety and security, then we will have to make some changes that are probably going to be much less agreeable to you. It's okay to set boundaries. And you've given so much, but it is absolutely essential that you communicate boundaries to them so that they understand better the impact of what they're asking of all of you." I don't know if that helps, but
It helps.
Yeah, that's useful.
Steve, first of all, this is Joni Friend, and I was the parish nurse in that congregation for many years until we moved to a retirement community, which has been a huge blessing for us. I know the family of which you speak, and I think sometimes tough love, setting boundaries, whatever you want to call it, is just necessary because they will just keep on asking and asking. And you do what you can in a loving way, but when it becomes not a loving way and it impacts on your own life, you have to really pull back. And it's okay. Another boost for retirement communities is that, if you can afford to be in one, and they are very expensive. And we moved to Nebraska because they are so much less expensive. But there are plenty of social opportunities here, both in the physical fitness realm, but also just in playing cards or, getting together, for cupcakes or drinks or whatever. And so that's really, and to have that choice, we made the choice before we needed to. And, to have that choice yourself and pick where you want to go is so important. And so many people just hold on to thinking that they can continue to live in their own home until they die. And rarely is that the case, honestly. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Jack.
I wonder if polarization is making it harder to make contacts. I'm thinking now of a granddaughter in high school. And she said that, there've always been cliques in high school, but the cliques don't like each other. Now, usually cliques just tolerate each other, but one specific clique, there's a group of people in high school who are trans or gay, lesbian, whatever. And they're a separate group. And they don't like the rest of the students, and the rest of the students don't like them. I'm sure this is not the only clique, but I'm wondering if our whole polarization of society isn't making it harder, and particularly in this case for teenagers. Any thoughts?
Yes, I do have some thoughts. I think the fact that you're even talking about this is very important. That we can have that open communication with our teenagers, that we can really listen to what their thoughts are also. It's tricky right now. It is tricky, and it's tricky for our students. It really is. So the fact that I thank you for bringing that up, but I think having a communication, open communication is incredible with that non-judge. We talked a little bit about the non-judgmental manner of really listening to what they have to say. I do think the school counselor hopefully could help those students as well. By going in and doing some lessons in the classroom or doing some groups at lunchtime so that they can start to work on this. And I do know that educators, this is an important topic right now, and they are working on this. This is kind of a new topic, really. I mean, it's been going on, groups and cliques and so forth, but this particular. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
I just add as a high school teacher. At my school, we call them affinity groups, but our counselors are really good at least once during our 7-day block rotation, having a co-curricular time where everybody gets together and talks, and it's not, so they're recognizing differences, but also encouraging people to talk to each other, so. And what you said, I feel like half of my job is I'm a math teacher. I teach geometry and calculus, but the other half of my job is dealing with my students with anxiety.
Right,
Yeah.
and being
So-
that empathetic
Yeah.
listener is
Yeah.
so, great. Thank you for that.
Jack, there's an interesting, there's a similar phenomenon that goes on, I think, outside, for older folks. And that is that, between 2003 and 2020, the amount of time that the average American spent alone each month increased by the equivalent of an entire day, while the amount of time that Americans spent with friends in person decreased by 2/3.
Wow.
So the relationships that we used to get with bowling clubs or churches or clubs of some kind have gone by the wayside. And so things are much more polarized, and people don't mingle with folks who have different views than them. That's a whole nother problem I won't get into. But anyway, I do think that it's also a problem among it's a serious problem with these kids in school, but it's also a serious problem for folks outside that.
Okay, there's you and then you, please.
Okay, and I teach high school in special ed, and something that I've noticed that has to do with the polarization and maybe the AI, you made a comment earlier, the conflict resolution skills that we all grew up with, that we all had to deal with on a daily basis because we were interacting with people are not there because we are texting and there's no context, there's no tone, so there's a lot of issues. People don't understand, I'm gonna have a conflict. It's part of life. So how do we, I mean, I watch people, you know, in the hallway, well, I'm not friends with them anymore. Well, why? Because of something that seems to me very small, but they don't know how to navigate it. They don't know that this is normal and I have to decide, is this a moral issue for me? You know, how do I navigate this? How do I figure out when is it okay to drop a friend and when is it okay that I just need to move forward? And we don't have those skills. And I think we're also seeing that played out in the political scene and just we're not seeing it. So therefore we don't have the opportunities to practice it and to learn it. We're not being taught. And I think that's having major ramifications.
Thank you.
Also, as a school teacher in DC, it was hard to make time for these kinds of conversations because we were under such pressure to get curriculum covered, to keep grades up, and it was hard. I have two children who are queer. The youngest one, the school counselor was always at me, your child is depressed. And we had conversations. This kid didn't think they were depressed. I sure didn't think they were depressed. The caregivers, you know, the medical professionals didn't think they were depressed. They were queer. They didn't have a core group of friends who truly understood them. And I, as a parent, have to get over the fact that I'm never having Thanksgiving with this kid because they've found a core group of people who understand and just want to be together without the rest of us, you know, and it's hard for them, it's hard for me, but life is hard. But it just, when you said talk to your school counselor, also take whatever is said heart, but with 4 grains of salt, at least, because it's never easy.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for sharing it with us today.
So we do have a request that say your first name, identify yourself as you start responding. That was Karen and Jack. So anyway, yeah. But,
Thank you, because I'm not familiar with the names.
yeah, let's see it. Let's see. There's another question.
Can I make one more comment? Our middle child was married this summer. And people ask, well, who's that? Who's the officiant? And I say, oh, that's the new spouse's ex. And people are just so like, that's weird. And, you know, I thought that was kind of odd too. But my kids have explained this to me, that the percentage of queer people is so small. And why people get so upset about it, I don't know, because it's so small. That many have learned that they need to get along over time, and they keep track of their exes. And they love their exes. And they're helpful to each other, and they have history, and they have shared experiences that are really deep and that need to be respected and continue to be cultivated. And I'm so happy that now I have a daughter-in-law, and I got Lindsay in the deal. It was really great.
Thank you very much for sharing that.
We just have one remark on the chat, if that's okay.
Okay.
Just to make everybody aware as groups that are important, that Bradley Hill supports a group called the Friends Club, which has about 12 men with moderate dementia that meets daily for activities and friendship. It's a real mission that has made a big difference. Yeah.
You realize that's quite a,
It's
Offering,
something, and
yeah.
some of the most, you would know the names of some very famous people who have, they're members of that club.
Right.
Sort of, yeah, support groups. But communication and community, as Rob was saying, those people, there's still an identification there that's remarkable. And share with each other.
You know, one of the things that I ran across, I wanted to be sure to mention before we have to.
Well, and Elaine
Get off.
has something. a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lane, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm terribly sorry.
And it's bringing up, because it's something, I have three adult daughters, and the youngest one is 37, and there are two topics that continually come up with her on a lot of what we're talking about. One is, it appears, and I've read about this too, because you were talking about men having more trouble in aging, but the men are having a lot more trouble in their 30s, 20s and 30s in identification. And they've become very lonely and isolated. I have a nephew that is experiencing this, and it just relationship, they don't know what their role is in culture anymore. And it's that, so you're all nodding. This is okay. So this is a real thing too. And the other thing, and I love pets, so nobody starts sending daggers at me, but she's also brought up, especially during the pandemic, her single friends. She feels like they're substituting pets for people.
Mhm.
And there, the amount of time and the energy, and like they will put their pet above their relationship with her. A lot of times, there's just this new obsession, and the things they buy, the things they do, they won't leave the pet. It's a little bit like the elderly aging care. And so, and I think, I mean, so have you seen this at all? I mean, or that's not as big a problem, because generally pets can be very positive for people. I understand that, but she just is amazed at how much of that she's seeing.
I know that age group, and particularly if the young people are looking for partners and there's an expectation that they should be getting married, having children, etc. Tremendous amount of pressure is put on them to fulfill that dream of our society. Yes.
I can speak a little bit to that. I have a 34-year-old son who still lives at home. He was independent for a couple of years. He's had some ongoing mental health issues, but they're under control. He had a significant relationship, but it didn't end in marriage. He kind of is interested, but he's still trying to get his career together. 10 years after college, after graduating from college, stability is like, I gotta go to graduate school. And he's looked at that, but he hasn't made that leap fully into adulthood, probably because of health issues, but also because it is so difficult in our current environment that you basically have to jump into a very high-paying job in order to find that stability that a lot of us didn't have to find
It's true. Generation.
30 to 40 or 50 years ago.
Right.
And my daughter, she's married. She's 3 years younger than her brother. They was in the military, and that provided that basis stability. And she's got skills. She's got a good job already after just getting out of the military. Her husband is a veteran. He had that support through government support, got a good job. They're both working. They're both going to be able to buy a home. So that economic piece
Yes.
for young adults and that instability is creating issues with their identity, if that makes sense.
Oh, no, absolutely.
And the reason I think that they're finding that pets are a substitute is pets don't judge them. They don't. They love a dog or a cat because it gives unconditional love. People judge them. What do you do? That's an American thing. What do you do? If you go to Europe, they don't always ask that. They have a little bit slower, not always. But I haven't lived in Europe, but I've traveled there. I have friends there. There's quality of life things that are affecting our younger people. And even our older people too. And I'll just speak to this. Again, the lack of support, the financial support for anybody other than upper middle class who have saved over $1 million+ is lacking. Because if you need long-term care and you don't own a home, you're out of luck. And I think, I'm just speaking, sorry.
Well,
No, I'm glad
Yeah.
you're saying what you're saying, because it
But
needs to
I
be
just,
said.
I'm a caregiving, long distance caregiving relationship,
No,
and it's just,
Carol, could I say a couple things here? This is Rick.
Yeah, real fast. This is the last time to, yeah, this is great. Okay, Rick, yes.
Yeah, a couple of things. As many of you know, I'm a longtime member. As a 78-year-old, I can relate to a lot of what was talked about here. I often tell folks, if I didn't have my medical appointments and my treatments, I wouldn't have much of a social life at all. And
You're saying,
That's
yeah.
terrible.
seriously, I really am thankful for the faith community of Bradley Hills. Judy and I have been members for decades, and the friends made here, and that we continue to engage from Bradley Hills is very, very important to us. One thing on a positive note, I'm not a real fan of Netflix, and I'm especially not a fan of Netflix series. However, Judy talked me into watching the series, A Man on the Inside. It's a Ted Danson. It's a very lighthearted sort of series about folks in a senior care facility, but it has some very good lessons that Judy and I talked about as the series went on that really hit home for us and probably a lot of people that watch it. So anyway, I recommend that to folks, even if you don't like Netflix and series.
Yes, Venus and I have both watched it. It's fabulous. Yeah, it's really fun and real. It's except they're in a very nice retirement center. Thank you, Rick. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. No,
Go ahead.
I just want to say I'm glad that we had this opportunity to be together. And I'm sure that there are more questions or comments that people want to be making, and I'm sorry we don't have more time. And I want to thank our panel, who's been so helpful and supportive and instructive too, as well as being fun. They were very fun to work with.
Oh, and they work very hard on this. And this is their time that they have given to Bradley Hills as our community. I can't thank you all enough. We're so grateful.
Here.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
One last word is that join us. Well, we need to continue this discussion in our community in lots of different places and as we have opportunities here, just to keep building and to be grateful during this Advent season. And David Gray will be joining us next week to lead a discussion of the historical, contextual, and theological comparisons of the birth of Jesus as told by Matthew and Luke. And as you know, David leads a great interactive search and study. So we look forward to that. And the following week, we have Denise leading us in I'm sure, equally compelling discussion as she looks at God in the Manger by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So thank you so much. And, have a great holiday season, but remember, we need each other. Reach out.
Thank you.
In person.
Thank you for having us, Carol.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you enough.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.